The greatest medieval battle ever filmed is not simply an act of cinema but a breathtaking attempt to recreate the very essence of an age defined by honor, ambition, betrayal, and the clash of steel against steel. In the minds of audiences who witness such a spectacle, the boundary between history and performance blurs, and what remains is an overwhelming immersion into a world where kings fought to expand their power, knights lived and died by the sword, and common soldiers marched in droves to meet fates as brutal as they were uncertain. The battle on screen is not just about the choreography of thousands of extras, horses, weapons, and banners but about resurrecting a time when life itself was bound to the battlefield. The grandeur, the chaos, and the sheer humanity of it come alive, making us believe we are standing on the very soil where armies collided and where destiny was decided not by words but by blood. At the heart of this medieval clash lies a king who embodies ambition in its purest form. A ruler forged by the demands of both crown and war, he emerges as a figure whose fate will be written in the cries of men and the clash of weapons. His enemy, another monarch no less fierce, rises in defiance with his own army of knights and infantry, determined to protect his land, his people, and his legacy. What makes the greatest medieval battle so enthralling on film is that it does not reduce these figures to caricatures of good and evil but paints them as men caught in the terrible gravity of history. Both have reasons to fight, both inspire loyalty, and both know that the victory of one means the ruin of the other. The film captures their strategies, their doubts, and their resolve with a detail so visceral that it becomes impossible not to feel the weight of their choices. The knights themselves, armored in steel that glimmers under the sun, form the most unforgettable image of the battle. These warriors ride into combat with the code of chivalry etched into their hearts, though the carnage of battle often tests the very ideals they swore to uphold. Their lances lower as cavalry charges erupt like thunder across the fields. Horses gallop with unrelenting speed, their hooves pounding the earth until it shakes. Spears splinter upon shields, and swords ring in the deafening chaos. Each knight is a story in himself, a nobleman desperate to prove his valor, a veteran scarred from past wars, a young squire eager for glory yet unprepared for the reality of slaughter. The film spares no detail in showing how the blood and mud of battle strip away illusions, leaving only raw survival and the true measure of honor. But what elevates this battle beyond mere spectacle is the presence of the common soldiers, the footmen who form the backbone of every medieval army. They are farmers turned fighters, craftsmen wielding pikes, villagers pressed into service by feudal obligation. In their hands are crude weapons, but in their hearts burns the determination to defend their land or obey their lord. The camera lingers on their faces, some terrified, some grimly resolved, some already resigned to their fate. When the lines of infantry crash into one another, it is not just an exchange of blows but a grinding struggle of bodies, shields, and sheer will. Spears jab forward, swords hack downward, and men stumble and fall into the mud, trampled beneath the advance. Their cries echo louder than the horns of the kings, a reminder that every battle is fought not just by rulers but by countless lives whose names history will never record. The cinematography of such a monumental recreation transforms the battlefield into a character in itself. The rolling hills, the forests at the edge, the rising smoke, and the clash of banners create a canvas as vast as any painting. The filmmakers use sweeping aerial shots to capture the immensity of two armies stretching across the horizon, their standards snapping in the wind. Then, with brutal intimacy, the camera plunges into the melee, where every strike of a blade, every gasp of breath, and every desperate cry is felt. The blood on the ground soaks into the soil, turning fields of green into crimson. Arrows blot out the sun as volleys rain down, their whistling descent followed by the thud of impact and the screams of the fallen. It is both beautiful and horrifying, a vision of war that compels us to watch even as it unsettles the soul. No medieval battle would be complete without the strategies that precede it. The film captures the tense councils of war, where kings and generals argue over tactics, weigh risks, and make decisions that will determine the fate of thousands. The use of cavalry to flank the enemy, the positioning of archers on high ground, the reliance on fortified lines of infantry, all these elements unfold with meticulous detail. Maps are spread on wooden tables, and torches flicker as commanders lay out their plans. The suspense builds as both armies prepare, and the viewer senses that once the horns sound, there will be no turning back. In these moments, the film transcends action and becomes a meditation on leadership, duty, and the crushing burden of command. The clash itself is relentless, yet the film does not reduce it to meaningless violence. Instead, it interweaves personal stories into the maelstrom. A knight searches desperately for his brother in the chaos. A young soldier recalls his family as he clutches a sword too heavy for his hands. A king, armored in gold, raises his blade high to rally his men even as death closes in. These human threads anchor the grand spectacle, reminding us that beneath the armor and titles are flesh, fear, and love. It is this fusion of epic scale and personal struggle that makes the greatest medieval battle ever filmed so unforgettable. The sound design envelops the audience in the reality of medieval combat. The clash of metal on metal, the thunder of hooves, the creak of leather armor, and the cries of men fill every corner of the battlefield. The soundtrack, blending somber chants with pounding drums, rises and falls with the tides of combat, echoing the heartbeat of war itself. In quieter moments, the eerie silence after a charge or the mournful wail of the wounded pierces the heart more deeply than the loudest roar. This sonic immersion ensures that the audience does not just see the battle but feels it in every sense. The kings themselves become symbols larger than life. One stands defiant, his crown gleaming even as the dust of battle clings to him, refusing to bow even when the odds turn against him. The other, triumphant yet weary, bears the knowledge that victory demands a price greater than he imagined. Their confrontation on the battlefield is not merely between two armies but between two visions of the world, between ambition and survival, conquest and defense, glory and ruin. When their swords finally meet, it is not just the clash of steel but the culmination of everything the battle has built toward. The fate of kingdoms rests in their hands, and for a moment, time itself seems to hold its breath. As the battle rages, the film does not shy away from showing the aftermath. The once proud field is littered with the fallen. Banners lie trampled in the mud, weapons abandoned, and the cries of the wounded echo long after the fighting ends. Smoke rises from burning villages, and carrion birds circle overhead. Victors and survivors alike wander in shock, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. The cost of glory is laid bare, reminding the audience that medieval battles, however grand, were tragedies for those who lived through them. Kings may write their names into history, but the ground remembers the blood of the nameless. What makes this cinematic recreation so extraordinary is its refusal to romanticize war while still capturing its grandeur. It is at once awe-inspiring and sobering, thrilling and heartbreaking. By merging historical authenticity with cinematic artistry, it creates a battle that feels both real and timeless. The armor gleams, the swords flash, and the banners wave, but behind every detail lies the reminder that war is the most human of dramas, a stage where courage and cruelty, honor and betrayal, sacrifice and ambition all play their parts. The film leaves audiences with images they cannot forget: the lone knight standing amidst corpses, the king kneeling in prayer before charging again, the young soldier clutching the hand of a fallen comrade, the thunder of cavalry disappearing into smoke. These moments crystallize into memories that linger long after the credits roll. They invite us to reflect on the nature of power, the fragility of peace, and the enduring human spirit that persists even in the face of unimaginable carnage. In the end, the greatest medieval battle ever filmed is more than entertainment. It is an experience that pulls us across centuries into a time when survival depended on sword and shield, when loyalty could mean life or death, and when the fate of nations was decided in a single day of unimaginable bloodshed. It is a testament to the enduring fascination of the medieval world, where kings and knights, peasants and soldiers, all played their part in a drama that continues to capture our imagination. By reliving this battle, we confront not only the past but also the timeless truths about courage, ambition, and the human cost of glory. The rise of two rival kings and their reasons for going to war. The story begins with two kings whose ambitions could not coexist on the same continent. One, a ruler hardened by years of conquest, sought to expand his dominion, believing destiny itself had chosen him to bring order to fractured lands. The other, a proud defender of tradition and sovereignty, refused to kneel, even when faced with overwhelming pressure. Their enmity was not born overnight but grew from years of disputes over borders, dynastic marriages, and broken oaths. Each king saw himself as the rightful protector of his people, yet their visions for the future were irreconcilable. When diplomacy failed and envoys returned with words of defiance, there remained only one path: war. The gathering storm was not just about territory but about pride, legitimacy, and legacy. The greatest medieval battle ever filmed captures this clash of wills by showing both monarchs not merely as rulers but as men carrying the weight of their crowns, knowing that victory would elevate them into legend while defeat could erase their dynasties from history. Their reasons for war intertwine with their personal ambitions, setting the stage for an inevitable conflict that would drench the earth in blood. The gathering of armies and the atmosphere of anticipation before battle. As word of war spread across kingdoms, men from villages, castles, and cities alike were called to arms. Trumpets sounded in marketplaces, lords summoned their vassals, and knights polished their armor for the trials to come. The film portrays this preparation with breathtaking scope, as thousands of extras fill the screen, each representing a real person drawn into the maelstrom of history. The atmosphere in the encampments is charged with both fear and excitement. Tents stretch across fields like a temporary city, banners fluttering in the wind while smiths hammer weapons late into the night. Campfires glow as soldiers whisper of omens, some confident of victory, others dreading the dawn. Horses snort impatiently, sensing the unease of their riders. The kings themselves hold councils of war, speaking in hushed tones beneath flickering torches, their generals weighing strategies as scouts deliver news of enemy movements. There is a sense that the world is holding its breath, for once the sun rises, nothing will be the same. The build-up to the battle immerses the audience in tension so thick it feels tangible, a reminder that the most terrifying moment is not the clash of blades but the silence before the storm breaks. The code of chivalry and the role of knights in medieval warfare. Knights emerge at the heart of the battle, armored symbols of power, loyalty, and tradition. Bound by the code of chivalry, they swore to protect their lords, honor their word, and fight with valor. Yet the battlefield would test these ideals in the most brutal ways. The film brings to life the image of gleaming armor, lances lowered in charge, and shields emblazoned with family crests, creating an awe-inspiring sight. But beyond the pageantry lies the reality. Knights were not untouchable legends but men who bled and fell just like any soldier. Their role was decisive, often leading charges that broke enemy lines or defending their king in desperate moments. Chivalry also dictated duels of honor amidst the chaos, knights singling each other out in combat even while armies clashed around them. This balance between glory and carnage, ideals and survival, gives their portrayal depth. The greatest medieval battle ever filmed does not shy away from showing both sides, the nobility of knights fighting for cause and the savagery of steel tearing flesh. In their shining armor, they embody the paradox of medieval war, a quest for honor conducted in mud, blood, and relentless violence. The presence of common soldiers and their struggle in the shadow of kings. For every knight in shining armor, there were 100-foot soldiers clad in little more than padded tunics, carrying spears, axes, or crude swords. These men, drawn from villages and towns, fought not for glory but because their lords demanded it or because survival left them no choice. The film brings their struggle to the forefront, showing the sweat, mud, and desperation of ordinary soldiers caught in the whirlwind of history. They march shoulder to shoulder, forming shield walls, their lives dependent not on individual skill but on discipline and cohesion. In the shadow of kings and knights, they often bore the brunt of the battle, holding lines against cavalry charges, pushing through waves of enemies, and dying nameless deaths that no bard would ever sing about. Yet their courage was no less real, their sacrifices no less significant. By focusing on their faces, the grim determination, the fear in their eyes, the exhaustion etched into every movement, the film ensures that the greatest medieval battle ever filmed is not just about kings and nobles but about the masses who paid the ultimate price. Their struggle grounds the spectacle in humanity, making victory bittersweet and defeat unbearable. The strategies, maps, and war councils that shaped the conflict. Behind every battle lies strategy, and the film highlights the tense moments of planning that shaped the course of history. Inside grand tents lit by torchlight, kings and their generals gather around maps, markers laid upon parchment as they weigh risks and opportunities. Scouts report enemy positions, while advisors argue over the merits of offense versus defense. Should cavalry strike the flanks or remain in reserve? Should the archers unleash volleys early or wait for the enemy to close? These decisions, debated in whispers and shouts, carry the weight of thousands of lives. The film captures the drama of these councils not as dry strategy but as moments of high tension where personalities clash and tempers flare. The burden of command rests heavily on the kings, whose choices will decide not only the outcome of the battle but the fate of their kingdoms. By intercutting these councils with the soldiers waiting outside, the film reminds us that strategy is not abstract, it translates into real blood spilled on the field. The war councils give the audience insight into the minds behind the chaos, showing how intellect and instinct can be as decisive as sword and shield. The cavalry charge and its devastating impact on the battlefield. Few sights in medieval warfare were as terrifying as a cavalry charge. The film captures this moment with breathtaking power, as rows of armored knights lower their lances and spur their massive warhorses forward. The ground trembles with the thunder of hooves, dust rising like a storm as the cavalry surges toward enemy lines. For the infantry awaiting impact, the sound alone is enough to chill the soul, a relentless drumbeat of destruction bearing down upon them. When the charge connects, the results are catastrophic. Lances splinter against shields, men are thrown into the air, and lines buckle under the crushing momentum. Horses trample fallen soldiers, and the battlefield erupts into chaos. Yet the film also shows the vulnerability of cavalry. When met by braced spears or clever tactics, even the mightiest charge can falter. This duality gives the sequence both awe and tension, leaving audiences holding their breath as knights crash into the fray. The cavalry charge becomes a symbol of medieval war itself, magnificent in its display of power, devastating in its impact, and uncertain in its outcome. It is a spectacle that defines the battle and lingers in memory long after the dust settles. The archers and their rain of arrows that darkened the sky. The archers are portrayed as the silent executioners of the battlefield, their bows transforming the air into a storm of death. The film depicts long lines of archers drawing in unison, the creak of bows taut with tension before release sends arrows whistling into the sky. For a moment, the battlefield darkens as thousands of shafts arc overhead, blotting out the sun before raining down with lethal precision. The impact is devastating, shields splinter, helmets are pierced, and men collapse screaming as the storm of arrows continues to fall. Yet the film also highlights the discipline and skill required of these warriors. They are not mere background figures but crucial components of strategy, their volleys softening enemy lines before the clash of infantry. Archers stand vulnerable, often targeted by cavalry, making their survival dependent on quick repositioning and protection from allies. Their role embodies the cold efficiency of medieval warfare, where death could come silently from afar. The sight of arrows descending en masse is one of the film's most unforgettable images, capturing the terror and inevitability of death from the skies. It is not just bloodshed, it is spectacle, painting the battlefield with fear and inevitability. The brutal hand-to-hand combat in the chaos of infantry clashes. When armies finally collide, the film plunges into the chaos of hand-to-hand combat, portraying it with a realism that is both awe-inspiring and horrifying. Shield walls slam together with a force that rattles the earth, and then begins the grim dance of survival. Men thrust spears through gaps, hack with axes, and swing swords in desperate arcs. The crush of bodies leaves little room to maneuver, and every movement carries the risk of death. Mud and blood mix beneath the fighters' feet, making the ground treacherous, while the screams of the wounded create an atmosphere of unrelenting dread. Unlike the glorious image of knights, the infantry fight is raw, dirty, and savage. The film does not shy from showing the exhaustion, the trembling hands, the moments of hesitation that can cost a life. Yet amidst the brutality, flashes of courage shine through, soldiers protecting comrades, refusing to yield, or pressing forward against impossible odds. This clash embodies the heart of medieval battle, where victory or defeat hinged on the endurance and discipline of ordinary men. The intimacy of these sequences, captured through close-up shots, forces the audience to confront the reality of war stripped of any illusion of romance. The symbolism and pride carried by banners, shields, and heraldry. Banners fly high above the chaos, their colors cutting through smoke and dust to mark the presence of lords and kings. In the medieval world, these symbols were more than decoration, they were identity, pride, and a rallying point in the heat of battle. The film treats banners and heraldry with reverence, showing how men would fight to the death to protect their lord's standard. Shields, too, are emblazoned with coats of arms, each telling the story of lineage and honor. To lose a banner was a humiliation, to capture an enemy's a triumph. Soldiers orient themselves by these colors, charging toward their own and fighting to capture those of their foes. The cinematography lingers on flags whipping in the wind, their cloth torn by arrows and stained by blood, yet still standing defiantly. These visuals remind audiences that war was not only about survival but about legacy, about the names and symbols that would live on long after men had perished. By emphasizing heraldry, the film highlights the medieval obsession with lineage and honor, making the battlefield not just a place of slaughter but of identity, pride, and the eternal struggle for remembrance. The personal duels and rivalries that emerged within the larger battle. Amidst the chaos of thousands, individual rivalries burn with particular intensity. The film captures these duels as moments where the grand battle shrinks to the clash of two men locked in mortal combat. Knights challenge one another across the field, their swords ringing with each blow, their eyes filled with hatred or respect. These fights are often driven by personal grievances, feuds between families, insults from past campaigns, or a burning desire to prove one's worth. The camera isolates these duels against the backdrop of mass carnage, elevating them into legendary moments within the greater conflict. A knight fights to avenge a fallen brother. A squire defends his lord against an enemy champion. A king himself draws his sword, refusing to let others fight his battles for him. These personal stories anchor the battle in human emotion, reminding the audience that even in the largest wars, individual choices and rivalries can shape destiny. The duels are brutal and intimate, filmed with sweat, grit, and desperation rather than stylized choreography. By focusing on these confrontations, the film ensures that the greatest medieval battle ever filmed is not faceless spectacle but a tapestry of human drama woven into the chaos of war. The soundscape of war, clashing steel, thunderous hooves, and cries of men. Sound breathes life into the battle, transforming what could be mere spectacle into an overwhelming sensory experience. The film envelops the audience with the roar of war, the clash of steel on steel as swords meet shields, the bone-rattling thunder of hooves pounding across the field, the deep blare of war horns signaling commands, and above it all, the cries of men. Some shout in rage, others in fear, and many in agony as they fall. The soundscape is layered so densely that it feels as though the viewer stands in the middle of the battlefield. Even quieter moments resonate, the eerie silence before an arrow volley, the heavy breathing of soldiers bracing for impact, the mournful wails of the wounded after the fighting subsides. Music swells and fades in perfect harmony with the action, drums echoing like a heartbeat during the charge, chants rising like prayers amidst the slaughter. Sound becomes not merely accompaniment but storytelling, conveying the emotion, chaos, and relentless rhythm of war. Through it, the greatest medieval battle ever filmed becomes more than visual. It becomes an experience felt through every nerve, echoing long after the images fade from the screen. The king's leadership in the thick of battle and the burden of command. At the heart of the battle stands the king, not a distant figure hidden behind walls but a warrior commander who shares the dangers of his men. The film portrays him riding at the front, his golden crown glinting beneath his helm, his voice carrying commands that steady faltering lines. His very presence inspires courage, reminding soldiers that their sovereign fights beside them, not above them. Yet the burden of command weighs heavily on him. Every fallen knight is a loyal vassal, every slain soldier a subject whose family will grieve. The camera lingers on moments when he hesitates, torn between pushing for victory and preserving the lives of his men. In his eyes we see the crushing weight of responsibility, the knowledge that glory comes at a terrible cost. His leadership is not flawless. He stumbles, bleeds, and doubts, but it is this humanity that makes him compelling. The film shows that kings were not just rulers but warriors, and in the crucible of battle, their choices shaped history. By blending grandeur with vulnerability, the king's leadership becomes one of the most unforgettable elements of the greatest medieval battle ever filmed. The pivotal turning point that decided victory and defeat. Every battle has a moment when the tide turns, and the film captures it with heart-stopping tension. For hours the clash rages without clear victor, the field strewn with fallen men and broken weapons. Then comes the turning point, a maneuver, a rally, or a collapse, that shifts the momentum irreversibly. Perhaps it is the cavalry breaking through weakened lines, or the archers striking down an enemy commander, or the king himself rallying his soldiers in a desperate charge. The film builds to this climax with masterful pacing, intercutting wide shots of the battlefield with close-ups of terrified faces, the sweat and fear of men who sense that everything hangs in the balance. When the moment arrives, it explodes with cinematic force, reshaping the battle in an instant. One side surges forward with renewed fury, while the other crumbles into retreat and slaughter. This turning point embodies the cruel truth of war. that thousands of lives can hinge on a single decision, a single moment of bravery, or a single stroke of luck. It is the climax of the spectacle, the instant when victory is seized and defeat sealed, forever remembered in legend and film alike. The aftermath of battle, death, destruction, and the human cost of glory. When the clash subsides, the battlefield transforms into a landscape of devastation. The film does not shy away from showing the aftermath, the silence broken only by the groans of the dying, the ground littered with corpses, armor dented and bloodstained, weapons scattered like broken toys. Smoke rises from burning villages nearby, and carrion birds circle overhead, drawn by the stench of death. Survivors stumble through the wreckage, their faces hollow with exhaustion and grief. Knights who once gleamed in armor now stagger, mud-caked and wounded. Common soldiers weep beside fallen comrades, or wander in shock, unable to comprehend the scale of loss. The kings themselves bear the weight of victory and defeat, their crowns feeling heavier than ever. The audience is reminded that battles are not triumphs to be celebrated lightly but tragedies etched into the soil. The cost of glory is paid in blood, and even the victor must reckon with the ruin left behind. This aftermath gives the spectacle its emotional depth, ensuring that the greatest medieval battle ever filmed is not remembered merely for its grandeur but for its sobering portrayal of war's devastating consequences. The legacy of the battle is remembered in history, legend, and film. Long after the blood has dried, the battle lives on in memory. Chroniclers record it as a clash that reshaped kingdoms, poets weave it into epic verse, and generations retell it as legend. The film embraces this legacy, acknowledging that medieval battles were not just events but stories that grew larger with each retelling. Victors are celebrated as heroes, their deeds immortalized, while the defeated are cast as villains or tragic figures, depending on who tells the tale. Over centuries, the truth blurs into myth, yet the essence remains, a day when kings and knights fought with all their might, when the fate of nations hung in the balance. By bringing this battle to the screen, filmmakers ensure that the story lives anew, not in dusty manuscripts but in living images. The legacy is not only historical but cinematic. The battle becomes a cultural touchstone, inspiring awe, debate, and reflection in audiences across the world. In this way, the greatest medieval battle ever filmed transcends its moment, bridging past and present, reminding us that though time moves forward, the human fascination with courage, bloodshed, and destiny on the battlefield endures eternally.